So we are here outside the Dell and Gates Computer Science Complex at UT Austin. And this is a relatively new complex, I think, within the past 5 or 6 years. It's quite a large building. And I don't know, probably some of you have listened to my previous interviews, realize that my deep dive into education activism came about when Boston Consulting Group recommended the closure of 23 public schools in the city and the laying off of 3,000 teachers. And then shortly thereafter, they rolled out a program of essentially putting schools on report cards and grading them after they created this really intense harm. And so the summer after that had happened, in the spring, there were meetings to talk about these report cards. And what I found out at the time was that the funders behind this effort to not only push report cards, but also consolidate the admissions office into a single admission place that was outside of the public schools that you would apply to Catholic schools, private schools, charter schools, and the regular magnet public schools. All of that was actually being funded by the Dell Foundation. And so really I have the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation to thank for my deep dive into what began as education activism and then turned into poverty management research and impact investing, and now transhumanism and AI. So it really if it wasn't for the Dell's overreach in that regard, I probably wouldn't be on this path. So it's kind of significant to be here today and talking about Dell and Gates, who clearly has his hands not only in all of the health tech space, but also in the ed tech space. So again, my trajectory for learning about the privatization of education and how it evolved into a much bigger space really is directly tied back to the Gates Foundation and the Dell Foundation. So when I was looking into researching the space for our trip, I realized that there was a new AI report that launched through the federal government, and one of the chair of this committee that was looking into ethical AI and the implications of AI for future development in the United States anyway, his name is Peter Stone, and Peter Stone is a professor here and in this complex, and his focus is actually learning agents. And so he's involved in a program to essentially try to create a robot that will play soccer as though humans played soccer. It's called RoboCup, and it's an international competition that's been going on for quite a number of years. But the idea is to come up with robots that learn through trial and error and behavior modification and feedback loops, and that's very much about the cybernetics that goes all the way back to the post-war era and the Macy conferences, and then later on the work that MITRE was doing. And so once you start understanding the role, he was working not just on robots, actually physical robots that were playing soccer, but going to develop bots for placing bids and trading, so online financial service. So entities that did not exist in physical space but existed as code and that were part of financial transactions trading and buying and selling. And that is a piece of what is central to high frequency trading and algorithmic trading that, in many respects, I think leads to catastrophe for regular people. It makes a few people very, very rich and leads to catastrophe for most of the rest of the people on the planet. Dr. Stone was just appointed to lead Sony AI, artificial intelligence, here in North America. And what was important to know about is that Sony is actually in the space of Japan's Moonshot project. And I've mentioned on a couple of other talks about this effort of the Japan Science and Technology Agency that they have this Moonshot project, and goal number one of this project is that by 2050 that we live outside of the limits of a physical body and mind and time and space. So it's complete cybernetic transhumanism. And so Dr. Stone, through his connections with Sony, is in that larger web of relationship around the Moonshot project and transhumanism and existing life as an avatar. So I think if you look at it through that lens, then when you start examining it more closely, what you realize is that he's developing what he calls learning agents. So the robots learn through trial and error. You hit a barrier, you bounce back, you redirect course, to proceed through the maze, that sort of thing. Really the goal, what's happening now with biometric identity, blockchain identity, and wearable technologies is that all of life on the planet, all of humans are being put into these feedback loops to be engineered through a maze by a game that is not under our control. And as we do jump through those hoops, eventually all of the data that is being collected both on our physical processes of doing this hoop jumping and our emotional and psychological states as we do it is being fed back into the machine learning systems, both as impact data for these human capital investment markets, again, which ed tech is central to this, and that's goal 4, but also into the singularity, that our digital twins are almost, it's like a parasitic force to suck our soul and spirit into the Borg, because in many respects this AI Borg wants to be human, to have a soul, and it will never have a soul. And in fact, we just came up the walk, they were doing some tabling, these college students, and one of them said, souls on auction or something like that. And I'm assuming it was like an atheist group or whatever, but like literally this idea of your soul and who has control of your soul in a system where you are being turned into a learning agent or a teaching agent maybe for the AI, there are these larger questions. So I made a little offering to leave up at this sculpture up there, and someone from Texas actually had sent me a lovely cactus pad, like a prickly pear pad, in the shape of a heart. And so I felt like the most important potent medicine was probably needed to be here at this building, as we face down the Moonshot Project and cyborg avatar capitalism. And so I made this arrangement with findings from not only the gift of the cactus pad, but also some dandelions sent by the family of a dear friend. And early in my activism, I connected with my friend Carolyn in Seattle, and Carolyn was the first person to ever invite me to give a talk at her local library. And so I flew out to Seattle thinking, like, this is silly, like, who am I to do this talk? But I did this talk about what Silicon Valley has planned for the future of education. And at that time, I had no real clue fully about impact investing in human capital bonds or about harvesting our data to create digital twins to feed the singularity and to possibly turn us into avatars. I did not know that part. And so I've kept in touch with Carolyn, and a few months ago I got a small envelope in the mail from one of her children who said, "Mom, send these dandelions to Allison." So I've held on to them for a while for a really good place to leave them. And so Carolyn is a really creative force and has done a lot of sort of creative performance art in her activism. And so I thought it was quite fitting, knowing that our sort of larger nemesis around humane education has been the Gates Foundation and the Dell Foundation, to be able to incorporate those dandelions from her family into our offering today here at the Gates Dell Foundation was pretty meaningful. So maybe, so the next little bit, I've got my dandelions, my dried dandelions offering, and it looks like it's maybe between classes, but it's pretty busy here. But I'm gonna sprinkle some dandelions outside the doorway. And I'm going to take, this is Zella's dandelions. They made lots of copies, so I'm going to leave that up on the offering up there. Oh, and I forgot one last thing on this offering. So a few weeks ago, I was visiting a cemetery, Eden Cemetery, out in Darby, Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia. And I was going through a bit of a rough patch. And, you know, there's been some tension, I think, in the storytelling world about which is the right story to tell for those of us who are seeking to stay on a natural path, right? And what that story is that we live in. And so clearly I'm making a case for the dandelion story. I'm not here to tell anyone else that they have to follow the story that I'm living in, but I'm trying to model that. There are others who are looking at a story that is, I think, perhaps brings a different energy to it, something that is really focused on sort of intense, strong and unpleasant emotion and trying to manage that. And so some things had come up, and in the cemetery, I had seen there was actually a carcass of a raptor. And I love findings. You can tell I love these little gatherings. And I was thinking, oh, are there any feathers here that I might take to Austin? And it was kind of clear that it was kind of unpleasant, and that no, those weren't the feathers. But then on the way out, I knew I wanted to take some cedar from the tree and put them on Marian Anderson's grave. And I was walking up to her headstone, and the people who pointed it out to me, they said, it's just past that maple tree right there. And so everyone had left from the tour, but I walked past that maple tree, and this golden feather was right in the bark of the tree at eye level. It was just stuck in the tree. And it's amazing because this is, I think, an oriole feather, and this doesn't happen very often. I mean, I'll find feathers on the ground occasionally. Mostly they're just buff, gray colored, or sometimes a blue jay, or sometimes a turkey feather, but I've never seen this golden feather. And I thought, that is the world speaking to me, saying that carcass that wasn't the right energy. That was the energy of the other story. But the story that we're trying to live in right now, until conditions force us to live otherwise, is the story of the golden feather, this spark of creativity and love and light within all of us and all of our hearts. And so to me, this was the gift feather that I was supposed to take to Austin. And that was my interpretation. So I held on to it for the last 2 or 3 weeks. And again, given the strong intervention, transmutation, rebalancing that needs to happen in this space, and knowing that it's kind of the position of, we've taken on the mantle of scrappy moms against AI, right? Scrappy moms against AI. That the heart, Carolyn's dandelions, and the oriole feather all belong together. So here's hoping that we can channel a force that allows us to live not in the metaverse. And that was just Zella's dandelion paper that blew in. So there's some kind of crazy installation in there with like foam stickers and, I don't know, hair ties. So maybe that will come, maybe that'll balance that out. So I'm just gonna put the feather back on, and some pink quartz, and some acorn caps with cedar from, I think, North Carolina. They sent me a whole bag of cedar findings. So here's to love and scrappy moms against AI. This would be one of the centers here. Texas technology, biotechnology is next. That's down the block.